Okay, so we are ready to start today's workshop. And of course, as you all know, the topic is about exploring the potential of LLMs, large language models, on different topics in the intersection of education. A lot of us here joining are either in academia, high school students, undergrads, and graduate students, where a large part of what we do is like learn new topics, prepare for exams, and it is interesting to explore the different usage of LLM tools and technology in this context. So today is an open discussion about like in a way this type of intersection, but also how do we build solutions that would allow us to utilize LLMs in a way that would go beyond the straightforward use of LLMs using chatbots and prompt-based mechanisms only. So we're going to discuss that throughout today's workshop. And also, I'm going to give a demo. So most of the workshop is actually going to be a demo about like how to use existing LLMs and how we can build solutions that would help us study. Of course, given the limited time in the workshop, it's going to be a very simple example, but hopefully it will inspire some interesting discussions today and some interesting ideas. And as always, if anyone got interested and want to do something beyond this, taking the things that we discuss here in the workshop and try to do something interesting or technologies that are interesting, kind of like based on them, that would be wonderful, and I'll be happy to help. So in today's lecture, these are the topics that we're going to be covering. We're going to cover large language models. And in today's workshop, we're not going to discuss LLMs in terms of building LLMs or training LLMs, but rather we will think of LLMs as a tool that we have available, publicly available LLMs out there, things like the Bard or ChatGPT and so on, and we want to use them as a tool. So what is the effective way of using them as tools? And then we're going to demonstrate their intersection with education and learning, especially kind of like learning and studying type applications. And specifically, we're going to explore one such use case in this intersection with learning and studying, which is building a coach for exam preparation. And I'm going to take as an example SATs, although it's really for anything, right? For those of you who are preparing for any kind of exam, you can relate the types of things that we're covering today to the exam that you're preparing for. And finally, I want to kind of like in a way open some kind of like discussion. We can brainstorm some different ideas. What are the challenges of using LLMs for this purpose, as well as what are the opportunities that we have to, in a way, build something that is interesting in that intersection. So we start kind of like from a very high level, kind of like large language models. I bet that all of you have already kind of like been exposed to large language models as tools and how to use them and how they're useful in different contexts. But basically, the idea of LLMs is that they provide a mechanism to the user to have, in a way to predict the next word in a sentence. Of course, this is the original way of thinking about LLMs, but you can have technologies around it that would provide it as, let's say, a prompt-based chat interface. So one of the most common interfaces that we're used to is what I show here in the bottom right. This is taken from ChatGPT, which is you ask a question for the LLM model, and then it would answer that question for you. Of course, there is more complexity to it, but basically one way to think about this is it's as if that you write this question and the LLM model is trying to predict what is the answer or the continuation of the sentence as an answer to that prompt that you provide to the LLM. This is here an example. If I want to write a program that would repeatedly ask me questions about multiplications to help me practice, in fact, we see that like LLMs would allow us to have or in fact allow us to receive such a response of the program that we're writing. And we're going to see variations of this because part of what we want to do today is building solutions that would allow us to help in exam preparation. The basic core use cases we're interested in today are these two use cases of LLMs, which is how can we automate programming tasks, but also how can we how can we have the LLM act as a conversational partner or coach? One of the unique things about LLMs when we think about the intersection with education is that there is this conversational, like interactive, language-based access, and that is different from, let's say, how a lot of technologies are being built right now. So when we think about the LLMs in terms of the technology, the LLM itself goes through pre-training and fine-tuning. So you can think of an LLM being built by having a massive data set. It could be like from books, websites, the internet. So a lot of the publicly available LLMs that we have access to today are ones that were built on such data sets where we have the wealth of data in the internet, and this is built on top of that. And after we build an LLM model, or after it is built, there are opportunities to fine-tune that LLM. And a lot of work is now ongoing in fine-tuning of LLMs, where we make it specialized for specific tasks. One example, which would intersect with today's workshop, is that we can fine-tune an LLM for, like, as a study coach or as a tutor, so that they can in a way be specialized in that topic. This is not what we're interested in today. So we're not interested in actually the fine-tuning of the actual LLM, but rather we're going to focus on a different aspect, which is for those general purpose LLMs, we want to use them and utilize them as they are and build wrappers around them and solutions around them for the purposes that we want. In this case today is for education and as a study kind of like tutor or a study helper. So in a way, you can think of what we're doing today is that we are considering LLMs as tools or black boxes, and we want to use that black box in our work. So kind of like one kind of like first open question that I have for you and feel to answer in chat is, I bet that a lot of you have already started using LLMs in your work, in your study, and I'm interested to kind of like to see different ways that you all are using LLMs. So if you don't mind, write in chat kind of like an answer to this question. What are ways that you are currently using LLMs as tools or black boxes, right? So whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Bard or something else. So yeah, tell me, what are, in a way, the use cases you're interested in? I'm going to wait for a minute and read out some of the things you write in chat. Oh, so here is a good question, which is what is meant by a black box, right? So usually in technologies or in software technologies, when we say that something is a black box, it means that we don't have access to what is inside of it. So think about a large language model. So it is built, and there is a lot of complexity that is inside of it. And if we want to use an LLM, one option is that we go inside the details and complexity of LLMs, and then we would, in a way, try to make modifications in the model itself, kind of like maybe make some additions, deletions, and so on. However, when we say that we want to treat the LLM as a black box, it means that we're not going to touch anything that is inside of the LLM itself. So the model itself is going to stay as it is without any change. We're just going to interact with it using its interface. So for example, for ChatGPT, we interact with ChatGPT as, in a way, this chat interface. We ask a question, we get a response, but we treat it as a black box, meaning that we don't go and change the model itself as users. I hope this answered the question. Of course, if there is any other questions or clarifications, let me know. And again, if anyone would like to share, like, what are current use cases that you're using LLMs, things like ChatGPT, for example, either in your studying or in your work, you can share that in chat. Okay, very good. So here is kind of like one of the things shared by some of you is that, like, being a software tester, I use ChatGPT to generate test cases for the applications. I think that's actually a very nice use case, right? A lot of like generating test cases, whether as actual test cases or programs that could generate those test cases. Actually, this is also similar to a use case that I do myself, which is in terms of generating workloads for applications. A lot of the work that we're doing is about building systems for processing data, and sometimes we want that data. So generating synthetic data using LLMs is an interesting use case. A lot of very good use cases. We use it for debugging, like text summarization, very good use cases. And I think we also have a question here. So what are the data formats that are usually used in the pre-training phase? So this is a very good question. And a lot of the data that is used is text data. In a way that you can think of it as the, in a way, main data type for training LLMs. But having said that, there are certain aspects or techniques that would, in a way, allow the use of like different data formats. But especially when we think about like LLMs, in those prompt-based interfaces, it's usually text data. So let's see some of the other answers here. So kind of like here is a nice kind of like answer from Abdelmajid, which is that kind of like sometimes, well, we don't heavily rely on them, but kind of like asking for examples or multiple level of difficulties and the thing or principle that I'm asking about. Actually, that's a very nice use case, which is relevant to what we're doing today. We're going to see that sometimes, especially when we're studying for something or we want to learn an idea, well, we want to start with, let's say, some easier kind of like questions or tasks, and then maybe we go to something that is more difficult later on. So we're going to see part of that as well. So I see that there is also some others who are using it, in fact, for understanding questions. It's also a use case that I use myself. So when I recently I tried to pick up a new topic that I was not familiar with, so I got like a small textbook about it, and as I'm going through the textbook, I would just kind of like take screenshots of what I'm reading or the text I'm reading, put it in ChatGPT, and ask it, well, can you simplify this to me? In a way, explain it to me as if I'm, let's say, a 10-year-old with a very simple example, right? And this was a very nice resource in terms of learning. So I see some other answers here in terms of like generating code snippets. That's also a very nice use case. A lot of bootstrapping for software systems and applications. Like when you want like things that are contained, LLMs are also very good with that. So here is also a very nice answer, which is I use GPT for my exam preparation. I prompt engineer it to behave as a professor and generate questions from me on a specific topic. And that's a very nice use case, which is also going to be relevant to what we are going to cover today. Okay, good. So I hope that I did not miss any questions, but thank you all for sharing those use cases. And I'm happy to see that a lot of those use cases are things that kind of like in a way are going to intersect with what we're covering today. And actually, here is this last one, which I also use myself, which is like sometimes we prompt them to like explain it to me as if I'm a child, right? That also helps a lot. So sometimes I ask ChatGPT when I'm trying to understand a very complex concept is to give me an example with apples and bananas and oranges, right? So kind of like I, in a way, try to make it as easy as possible. All right, so kind of like happy to see that there is a lot of you already thought about this problem, and hopefully this will enrich the discussion as we go on. And of course, feel free to write or chat whenever you have anything to share or a question to ask. So when we think about specifically exam preparation, which a lot of you already mentioned in the ideas in the previous slide, we see that LLMs can help us in exam preparation in things like question generation, personalized feedback as well. So when I ask a question, or maybe when I give an answer and it's incorrect, maybe I can get a personalized answer about, well, why is my answer incorrect? Maybe if I provide enough information about me and my background or the history of my interaction with the LLM, maybe it can also provide feedback that is tailored to me, that it would know that, well, I understand concept A, I understand concept B, but I don't understand concept C, so probably that's what it should emphasize. So this aspect of personalization is an important aspect as well. And as you all, some of you also mentioned, is that it can also help in generating mock exams, right? So like if I prompt the LLM to behave as an instructor or a professor and of a certain course, and I ask it, well, what are the kinds of questions that might be asked, and use that as a preparation for the exam. And of course, a lot of those use cases here, we can use them through the prompt-based interface, right? So if we have access either to ChatGPT or any of the other alternatives out there, we have this chat interface where we like ask questions. So for example, it could be generate an SAT question for me, and then we get that answer. And then I can, of course, interact with it in terms of explaining, providing some extra information, which is something that is accessible to us. But we want to now explore something that goes beyond those chat interfaces, right? So how can we really get the full potential of LLMs beyond us just interacting in a way, one question at a time with the LLM? And having known that a lot of you, if not all of you, joining us today have some familiarity with programming and with kind of like in a way automating these processes, what I'll be discussing today is how do we interact with LLMs in a more automated way. So instead of only interacting with this chat interface, what if we built programs that would interact with these LLMs so that they provide us and the user a more friendly way to have the advantages of LLMs and the advantages of studying with LLMs. And basically, what we're going to be using is we're going to explore APIs of publicly available LLMs. So when we think about something like OpenAI, ChatGPT, or Bard, or others, these are the LLM models, and we interact with them through interfaces. We are familiar with the interface of a prompt base, so they have a web interface where we provide prompts and they provide answers. But there is also another way to access these LLMs. And this is an API, which is, you can think of it as an interface that is based on programming languages. So it's as if you are writing a program and then you're calling a function, and this function is actually sent to the LLM to be processed. So for example, imagine that you have a Python program. What you can do is that you can have an API request to the LLM model saying, generate an SAT question for me, and then the response of that API request is going to be the actual response that you get from the LLM. So very similar to how you would interact in the chat-based interface, but rather than you having to type in a way those requests and waiting for the answer every time, you can automate that process with the Python program. And this can be beneficial in various ways. Of course, if anyone kind of like would like to share as we go through the lecture on like different opportunities of this, and we're going to explore this later, but just to share a little bit now, one of the things that we might be interested in, well, maybe I'm interested in generating, let's say, kind of like a sequence of questions that adapt to my level without me having to prompt every time what are the things that I need to do. Maybe I want to have something that is, let's say, more interactive between me and other users, so that is something that we can share through this program rather than interacting with the LLM kind of like in a way each in their own. So we're going to see how having this automated program-based access to LLMs can allow us to have better opportunities to, in a way, get the potential of using them for studying. And we're going to get into some of, kind of like the basics of how this works. Kind of like this is, of course, might be a little bit kind of like not as straightforward to follow through for anyone who did not program with Python before. But I hope that at least given the survey that I sent before or like the responses I get, it looks like most of you have some familiarity with Python. If not, feel free at the end to, in a way, kind of like catch up, and we can, in a way, provide some more details on what this means. So we're going to now take a simple example of a program that interacts with an LLM. And in these examples, we'll use ChatGPT, OpenAI's API interface, and see how that is going to work. So I'm going to jump to the demo. Here in chat, there's also a very good comment about that. We can also use RAG techniques, which is also a very important aspect here. So I think, yeah, that's a good comment that we can get back to when we discuss the potential and opportunities more. All right, so I'm sharing now the screen again with the code snippets. Let's see here. All right, so just to check, if one of you can write in chat if you can see my screen. And of course, if the font is too small or it's not clear, also let me know. All right, so now we're going to start going through the program, and we're going to start with a very simple example. Right? And the purpose of this program is to send a request to the LLM and get a response. So the way that this is going to work is the following. First, we're going to import the dependencies that we want. And basically, the main thing that we want is the OpenAI library. So OpenAI provides a Python library that we can use to interact with their LLM through API calls. This part here, this is in a way not kind of like in a way important for the interaction with the LLM itself, but for us to be able to use a program and to use APIs, we actually first have to create an account with OpenAI, and after opening an account, we're going to get an API key. So this is the API key that you get from their interface, and then you can use it in your programs. And the reason why there is a need for such API keys is that when you send a request to their LLM servers, they need to know which user is making that call, because every user has a different account, and especially for things like charging for these requests, they need to distinguish between which user is making which request. So these lines here are basically just kind of like loading the OpenAI API key that I save in a file in the environment. So in a way, that's kind of like in a way orthogonal to the actual interaction with OpenAI. So is API like a library in a way or something similar? So that's a very good way to look at it. So that's one way that we can look at APIs, is that it provides us with a library to interact with some external system. Right? So unlike libraries where you just make a call and it executes within your machine, an API call to something like an LLM is typically something that you call a function in the library, and that library is going to handle taking your request, sending it to the other server that handles that request, and bringing you back the response. And as you see, your analogy is actually kind of like very good as we see the example now. All right, so now once we have loaded the environment and the OpenAI or the API key, now we can start interacting or building the interface to interact with OpenAI. The first thing that we need to do is to create this OpenAI object that we're going to use to interact or to call the functions of the OpenAI library. And then this is going to be the main function that is going to, in a way, make the request and get the response. So basically, we have this call, which is using the client object. We call a create function, which is part of these libraries or some libraries here. And as an input, it would get at least these two inputs. Of course, there are also other inputs that all of you can look in their documentations, but the main two inputs here is the model that you want to use. So for example, here, you want to use GPT for Omni, and also the message, which is what is the request that you want to provide to the LLM. In this case here, we provide two types of requests. The first one is a system request, which is, in a way, you're telling the LLM how should it act. In a way, what is the role of the LLM or the system itself? So here we say that, well, you are an experienced SAT instructor, right? So in a way, we want the LLM to answer as if it's an experienced SAT instructor. And then the other one is the message from the user, which is us. So the message to the LLM itself, which is in this case, as an example, is how is using LLM useful to prepare for SATs? So this is the program that we have. The response has been stored in this completion variable. And then in completion, there is a lot of kind of like, in a way, information about the response. For example, how many, let's say, tokens were spent for that response. But to get to the content of the response, this is what we need, right? So kind of like there is choices, message, that content. So the message here is from a previous run that I did. But now let's do another one of the new request that we just made. Now we see the response. So like in a way, the response that we got for this query here is written, right? So kind of like here, for example, using an LLM has a lot of benefits to SAT. And then we see that there is kind of like in a way, a lot of these different benefits that it lists. So now we see how we can make this call, and we're going to now kind of like in a way start seeing how we can automate things once we have this tool. Of course, so far, we're just making that one request. It was not as, in a way, different to what we have in a way before from interacting with the web interface. But now let's start in a way kind of like increasing the complexity a little bit and see what we can get. Before that, of course, if anyone has any questions, feel free to share them. So here's a question about what does the dot environment and get environment and completion line mean? So this part here, what it does is that it's a function that is going to read a file called .env that has a definitions of these variables. So the .env file has, in a way, the value of the API key, and by calling getenv, in a way, you're telling, in a way, the program to get you that variable name. And then, of course, we can also see some of the other information that is provided, right? So the content is, in a way, what is returned as a response. But there's also some other things kind of like that are responsive. For example, what is the role? Is there audio as part of this? Kind of like some of the other meta information that might be needed later on. So here's another good question, which is, do we call it prompt engineering or fine-tuning, which is the way you are doing it? In a way, this is definitely not fine-tuning, because fine-tuning is about going through or like inside of the model itself, changing the model itself by, in a way, adapting it or changing it. In terms of fine-tuning, it might be orthogonal here, or actually I meant prompt engineering. It's prompt engineering is part of what we are doing here, because we are writing prompts that are going to give us the result that we want. However, this is not only prompt engineering, but rather automating the interaction with LLMs through programs. And of course, part of this can also be through prompt engineering. So let's see if there's some other questions. So about the cost, unfortunately, a lot of these publicly available LLMs are not free. Some of you, especially if you are part of a university, a lot of universities started to provide free alternatives for LLMs that you can use and interact with for free. So I suggest that if you're at a university, ask if that is something that is provided. But other than that, it is paid, and mostly for text type interaction. Of course, there are some alternatives that would be either cheaper or would have some limits in terms of how kind of like affordable they are. I see that some of you might be already mentioning some of these. So if anyone has any suggestions that you want to share with the audience, please feel free to write them in chat. I think that would be helpful for everyone. Okay, so now we're going to continue. So now we're going to ask for something specific to the purpose that we wanted, which is, well, we want to, let's say, generate a question that we want to use, let's say, for our practice. One of the things that we can use, whenever we think about automation, we want to be able to have more structure in the outputs that we get. When we use the web interface of something like ChatGPT, one of the problems or issues with it is that we don't have as much control on the structure of the output. So for example, imagine that I want the answer to have a very clear structure of what the question is, what the answer is, and maybe some properties of the question, maybe the difficulty level. One thing that we can do with the programming API interface is to define the interface by defining a class and then defining what are the sections of the responses we want. So for example, we want a question that is a string, we want an answer that is also a string, and we want a difficulty level that is also a string. And now, when we ask a question, so for example, generate an SAT question, the response that we get is going to be structured based on this format. So we now provide another input to the function called response format that is going to be based on this question template that I provided. So now if we run this, we'll see whether kind of like we get this response format. So now we got event as the response that we get, and we see that there is a structure to it. So event itself has three different variables: question, answer, and difficulty level. So if we print them, we see that we get the question. So for example, in this case, this is one question, and then the answer, which is which one is correct, and then the level of the answer or the question. Is it an easy question, a medium question, or a more difficult question? We run this again, and we get another question. In this case, also medium, but as we change it, we can get different questions and different answers, as well as different difficulty levels. So here is a very good question, which is about sharing this code base. Yes, absolutely. I'd love to do that. So once we are done with today's workshop, I'm going to send an email to everyone with this notebook. So now this is the foundation of what we want to do. Now we have a way to interact with the LLM. And also we have a way to structure the output that we get from the LLM. And now this is going to allow us to do some more interesting things with it. So for example, here, now maybe what I'm interested in is I want a set of questions. So one way that I can think about it, if we want to create a question bank, just to make it in a way simple for now, we're going to ask it to generate 4 SAT questions for us. And in terms of the structured format, we're going to have this structured format where we have a questions object, which is going to be a list of questions. And each one of those questions is going to have this format where I have the question, the answer, and the difficulty level. And then the rest is the same. We issue that request, and this is going to get us, in a way, the list of the answers. All right, so now it's done. We can take one of the examples. So for example, these questions or like sets of questions and answers, we have 4 of them. And if we try, let's say, the third one, we get this one. If we, let's say, see the first question that we got, then we see kind of like this question, which is formatted in the way that we wanted, the question, the answer, the difficulty level. And this is also a simple program that is going to go over all the questions that were generated. So in this case here, we have these 4 questions with their difficulty level. So for example, I have 1 easy, 2 mediums, and 1 hard, and each one has the question as well as the answer. This is part of the automation that we can do with programs. Maybe what we want to do is not only to interact with the question and answers. Imagine what you want to do is you want to create a bank of questions and then build a program on top of that bank of questions to allow you to do this question answering. So in a way, this is a way for you to get that structured response and automate a lot of the usage of LLMs. So here's a question: what does it mean by parsed in messages that parse that question? So that's a very good question. So here, whenever we are using the format of the response, we need to specify that we're parsing the kind of like that. Parsed means that it is after you structured the answer based on the format that you've specified here. You can think of it as a standard way of asking for the response in the structured format. Of course, by the way, you might all be noticing that some of the things I'm not explaining in full details for the interest of time, but of course, if there is anything that you're curious about or that didn't make sense, feel free to share on chat and I'll be happy to answer. Okay, so kind of like now we've seen kind of like having this in a way more complexity on what we do, kind of like having a list of questions in a structured format that now we can maybe store in a database. Maybe we can, you know, we can kind of store a data structure so that we can do some more complex logic on top of them. Now we'll do one more thing, which is let's try to actually simulate an aspect of an SAT coach or instructor. And one of the things that are different about LLMs is that it allows you to interact with someone in a way that is kind of like in a way more interactive, that is different from, let's say, common interfaces of, let's say, study guides and having in a way to study by yourself. So this program here, what it does, I'm not going to go all the way through all of it, and I'm going to share it after the workshop. Basically, what it does is that it defines a function that is going to ask a question, but then it's also going to, what we're going to do is that we're going to ask it to continuously, so it's a program that continuously gets a question, an SAT question from the LLM, and then prompt you, the user, to provide an answer. So you can think of it as if a tutor is sitting with you, asks you a question, waits for the answer, and once you answer, it provides you with whether that answer is correct or whether there is, in a way, kind of like any help that they can provide. So let's try it out. So if we run this program, it's going to first give you the first question. This is the question that it got from the LLM. So for example, let's say in this case here, in a certain game, players score 3 points for each win and 1 point for each draw. If a player has, let's say, 7 wins and 5 draws, what is the total number of points a player has scored? Now let's just provide some random answers. So let's say that we provide 10. And now it takes that answer and then it returns it back to the LLM saying that this is the answer that the user provided, and it will give us a response as if a tutor received that response and is providing us an answer. So in this case, like, well, it says that the answer is not correct, and then it goes through like what are the reasons why it's not correct and helping the student answer that question. And after that, well, it gives us another question, in this case with a medium difficulty. But it will be the same thing, but you can think of it as something that is going to be continuously going. So as interacting with a tutor that asks you questions, you provide answers, and then you would get, in a way, help and corrections from that tutor. It just kind of like has a very simple dynamic that you provide an answer and you get help and then get the next question. But as you all might imagine, that this would allow us to have some more complex things that we can build on top of it. This is, in a way, part of what we want to explore as the potential of LLMs, especially as we automate interacting with them through programs. So I think with this, I'm going to kind of like, in a way, take a pause, get back to the presentation, and wrap up with this, which is, in a way, us all together. Maybe we can brainstorm a little bit. What are the things that we can, in a way, encounter in this aspect of automating LLMs for studying? One of the things that I would love to discuss is, well, what are the other ideas that we can use for LLM-based programs for studying and learning? And also some of the challenges and the problems that might arise, right? So one of the problems that might happen is that you provide an answer, and maybe the answer is, let's say, either correct or incorrect, but the response from the LLM is not the correct answer, right? So this is something that could happen, and one of the challenges of using LLMs, especially for these types of applications. Another thing is whether we kind of like the responses that we get, whether it's more like if we can make it more engaging or more empathetic. I think one of you mentioned in chat earlier that they're interested in creating a more empathetic way of interacting with the LLMs, which makes a lot of sense because if you remember in the previous example in the code, the response from the LLM was the answer is incorrect, right? This is not necessarily the most empathetic way of, in a way, interacting with a user. Like if a student is studying, well, maybe you want to encourage the, like, have a more encouraging response. So that's also one of the challenges, the things that we need to build as part of this. So I'm going to stop here and would love now kind of like to brainstorm with all of you together. If anyone would like to either like share in chat, or if you want to kind of like raise your hand, and feel free to kind of like, in a way, share your ideas kind of like by kind of like talking to all of us. So it looks like we have some responses here. So I'm going to start going through them. And of course, feel free to share any more ideas. We have like 5 to 10 minutes like left for the hour so that we can have it for the discussion. So here is kind of like some of the issue about some very interesting aspect, which is interactivity should be worked on for sure, which is kind of like is definitely a very good aspect, which is, in a way, how can we make the interaction with the program more natural? And this is something that is an opportunity when we use a program instead of kind of like, in a way, just interacting with a prompt-based or a chat-based interface. Maybe we can think of something that is more real-time, maybe something that is progressive, maybe even taking the responses we get from LLMs and making it or transforming it into audio that can be shared with the student. So knowing now that we can write programs to interact with LLMs, what do you all think the opportunities are to build software solutions on top of LLMs for studying and for learning? But also, what are the challenges, right? So either one of these two things you can share in chat, or feel free to also talk with all of us. Okay, so I'm going to read some of the ideas here. So also for real world use cases, what do you suggest for creating these questions and answers? I mean, how many questions and answers we can write as humans? We definitely need a lot of data, and we don't have data set available for each use case, or at least open source data. I think that's a very good point. And this is actually one of the things that are interesting about LLMs, is that even if there is, let's say, a test or like preparation that you're trying to do for a specific topic, you don't need really a specific data set for those questions. And the reason for this is that those LLMs are trained on general data sets that really kind of expand a lot of knowledge. So especially for tests that, in a way, have enough resources around in the internet and elsewhere, those are things that general purpose LLMs are already good at. So, for example, what we've seen today is that even though that I didn't have to train the LLM or provide examples of what SAT questions are, it gave us some good ideas. However, I think this is a very good observation, because once we get into maybe more specialized types of exams or studying or a course, part of what we can do is build programs that are also going to provide examples for the LLM so that it knows what to expect, and it knows in a way what are the types of things that it should generate. So I think that's a very good suggestion. I think the Zoom chat is scrolling down without me doing that. So very, very good suggestion as well, which is trying to integrate it into apps or web interfaces, whether of existing applications or of things that are newly built. So imagine if you're creating an integration with something like Canvas or in a way kind of like Blackboard, so that kind of like you can have some help in education by the things, let's say, that are shared in the courses that you're taking already. That's a very good observation. So let's read this comment out loud from Muhammad. Yes, previously I was building a study assistant to give hints to students to preserve their creativity instead of the direct answer, but I wasn't completely successful at that because it was giving direct answers. That's a very good, in a way, kind of like observation, which is one of the problems in studying is that sometimes you want to help the student learn, not really just provide the answer. This is a very tricky thing to be able to, in a way, to do. So as Muhammad observed, that this is something that is kind of like, in a way, challenging to do. Of course, I would love, kind of like, if you're interested, Muhammad, to share this with us and with everyone else, I would be happy to share it as well with everyone. And maybe that could be also a topic for some future discussions and work. But that's definitely one of the challenges. How can we make it a more progressive aspect, a more human aspect to do this interaction? So let me see some of the other comments here. Reading out one of the questions for interactivity, there are times that I've, or others even have felt frustrated at some questions. So talking to an LLM makes us think to directly ask for the answer instead of discussing it, which is short-term learning, which is, you know, like in a way, sometimes like we get this like very long, winding type answer, but we really just want to get to the gist of it. Maybe we don't want the answer right away, but we also don't want, in a way, a lot of fluff that is around it. We want, in a way, the right level of context and background, and maybe a clear place of where the answer is. And this is also something that programs can help in, because you can have, in a way, ready-made prompts, in a way, kind of like ready ways of how to interact with those LLMs. All right, so I see someone raising their hand. Yeah, go ahead, share. You can unmute.
Yeah, so for the interactivity thing, I meant that there should be less kind of context around the answer. Sometimes we get kind of frustrated and we directly ask it for the answer instead of kind of learning it. So that should kind of be solved, because instead of giving like a whole lot of text, it should be a bit engaging for the learner to actually want to solve it together instead of a kind of just impulse kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. That's a very good observation and comment. I completely agree with you that there is definitely this aspect of current LLMs is that the interaction seems to be, in a way, kind of like a one-shot type interaction. So even though that you're having a conversation with the LLM, you're right that this aspect of, in a way, collaboration and in a way doing steps together, like in a human-like way, is something that still is not there, and would be very nice, in a way, kind of like to have something like you described. It's actually something that I believe could be something that can be built as a program or an interface on top of existing LLM. So I think for anyone who's interested in that challenge, I think that would be an interesting one as well. Okay, thank you for sharing. So now let's see some other questions. There's a question here, a very good question about techniques and methods that, in a way, would go either within or around LLMs. So things like RAGs, lag chains, quantization, prompt engineering, and fine tuning. All these are very good aspects to cover. Maybe given the context of today's workshop and of course the time that we have, maybe it might go beyond what we can cover today. But if all of you are interested, of course, feel free to share with me after we are done with the workshop today. What are the topics that you'd like us to cover? And if that's something that a lot of you are interested in, we can cover it for future workshops. Here's also some questions about future studies and opportunities. Of course, feel free to share that with me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about, let's say, future studying and careers. I know that a lot of you are already part of our research college prep community and mailing list, where we share a lot of these resources about in a way, applying to undergrad schools, graduate schools, how to prepare for them. And if you have any specific questions, me or any of our team will be happy to provide help in that regard. I also see that Icon Goro is here with us today, which of course I know have also been providing a lot of help in this regard. And I would recommend everyone to see their resources that they provide as well. So let's see here some other comments. All right, so it looks like I hopefully covered at least most of the questions here. I think we're ready to wrap up right on time, 1 minute before the end of the hour. Thank you again all for joining us today. This workshop has been fun as always with your interactions, with your questions and comments. I would be happy to receive any feedback about kind of like the topics that you would like to hear, the resources that you'd like to learn for the rest of this new year. So thank you all, and I'll see you hopefully in the next workshop.